Good afternoon, everyone. It's Natasha Hawker from Employee Matters, and thanks for joining us for our blog interview today. I hope you have a cup of coffee ready for this fascinating chat with my next guest. I think for me, after dealing with hundreds of businesses over many years now, what I do know is that there's still a lot of confusion about what businesses have in terms of their obligations around WH&S. And in particular for white-collar businesses, there's a sense that WH&S is only applicable to blue-collar businesses. And I think the hard reality and the harsh reality, which I looked these statistics up today, is that 2 Australian workers die every week in Australia, and that blows my mind. And we need to do something about that. And I also know that the most common workers' compensation claim at the moment is stress. The stress claims are actually going through the roof. So, and you might recall that on our employee life cycle, which is behind me, WH&S sits under step 5, which is well-being. So we are thrilled to interview Stephen Sams from Sales ProSmart. Welcome, Stephen. How are you?
Thanks, Natasha. Really delighted to be with you today. We really appreciate the opportunity. I'm well, thank you.
Good. We're really glad to have you, and we're going to learn a lot of stuff from you, I can tell. So let's start at the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, long journey. Started back in the sort of mid-90s with a supply company I was working for, and they appointed me into the role of work health safety coordinator, or OH&S coordinator, as we used to call it back then. Mm-hmm. And I looked after 3 sites across New South Wales. From there, I entered the mining industry in the early 2000s, and obviously in that environment, there's a very strong focus on work health safety. And then I suppose through natural progression ended up as a plant risk assessor across Australia, looking after the civil contracting, mining, rail, construction and local government industries, assessing the hazards around plants, so earth moving equipment and the like. Went back to the mining industry again and took the money, as it were, and again was working as a what they call a surface competent person or emergency coordinator in the underground mining industry. And after about 4 years, the mining industry again downturned, and we were all shown the door, and off I went, and decided to pursue my own business, working in the area of compliance, but very much looking at where the human element of compliance meets the legislative requirements of compliance, and that's where we are today. Fantastic.
Sounds like an exciting journey. Tell me, Steve, why is WH&S important?
It's a vital part of all businesses, not just from the legal requirement, which is very clear and states that everyone must have a safe system of work. And that doesn't matter what type of business you are, be it a public or private company, a sole trader, a partnership with partners and no employees, a whole range of all businesses. They call them PCBUs, persons conducting business or undertakings. So you and I are both PCBUs. It's important because it doesn't just give a method to ensure safety of workers, but it also builds a very positive culture in the business. If everyone's got a clear direction on what they must do and what their requirements are, I think everyone works as a team very much more efficiently. Mm-hmm.
What do you see as the most common mistakes business owners make when it comes to WH&S?
They probably look at it, in my view, as being a very much difficult to manage. It's a big thing. It's hard to get your head around.
It's onerous.
Yeah, and it's cost inhibitive, and it's all of those things. And it's an interesting thing. Before 2011, the law said you must provide a safe place of work, paraphrasing, of course, but that's essentially what it said. So it didn't matter what a business did, they could never provide a safe place of work. So if someone got hurt, they were going to get sued. Didn't matter what we did, we were just going to get sued. I think that mentality is still very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, but the law's changed, and it now says you must do everything reasonably practicable to provide a safe place of work. So there's a little get out of jail card sort of built into that, but there's also some obligations for workers in the current legislative framework.
Which didn't exist so much before,
Correct.
Did it?
Well, it didn't exist at all prior to 2011. So there's been a fundamental shift in the legislative instruments that enable business now to have a lot more flexibility around what they do, providing they do it. But I still think people are stuck pre-2011 go, it's all too hard, we don't care.
Yes, and I think they do feel that way. What do you see in terms of or are you seeing an increase in the incidence of drug and alcohol in the workplace?
Absolutely, and I think the workplace is somewhat of a reflection of community by and large. And I've actually got a couple of numbers written down.
Oh, great.
And the Australian Alcohol and Drug Foundation says that alcohol and drugs currently cost $6 billion per year in lost productivity in this country. More startling, I think, is 1 in 10 workers have reported being affected by a co-worker's alcohol abuse. So that might mean a breach of safety protocol. It might just mean some workplace violence. It could mean a variety of different things. But 1 in 10 workers are reporting that. So yes, there's definitely been a spike in and around that substance abuse. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which I'm sure we'll discuss in a couple of moments.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can remember, and I'm going way back to my old days. My career started in banking and finance. And there was an old fellow who worked, he would have been in his 60s, well and truly, or maybe he was younger than that, but he just looked old. But every time he opened his drawers, there was clink, 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 clink. And there was just bottles lined up. And he was sipping away all day at the office. Now, he was just doing numbers. And obviously, I'm sure there's still a high error rate potential there. But obviously, in another environment, that's life-threatening, that behaviour potentially.
It certainly is. And even if you just withdraw the life-threatening behaviours and potentials of substance abuse, you start looking at things like reputational damage to the business. There's so many things that can happen. And if you think about the Act, the Work Health and Safety regulations, you think about the first five of the first 6 components of that: information, training and induction, general workplace environments, first aid, emergency planning, and remote or isolated work. You think about that in terms of abuse. Even that last one, remote and isolated work, you've got a common industry, real estate. It doesn't seem remote or isolated, but it actually is under the regulations. And then you mix in alcohol or drug abuse or substance abuse, more correctly. We're not there to control those people. We're not sitting there over a desk or over a workshop or over an office, whatever it might be. Those people are out of the office, and we have no control over them. But we must have reasonably practicable controls over them. So it's a very complex area that substance abuse is now drawing work health and safety into it. And I've often said other drivers, be it violence or other types of substance abuses, if you like, almost will default to work health and safety. And what we were saying before, people find it onerous, difficult, etc. Little things like that, and they are little things in the grand scheme of things, suddenly become a very big thing. And that's when work health and safety becomes an issue.
So that's a great place to lead into the risks. What are the risks for business owners if they get this wrong, or if they're not aware of it and they're not doing anything?
So in the very worst case scenario, and I'm talking the very worst case scenario, and this is not about fear, it's a matter of law. A business owner can potentially go to jail. It's the only one that they can go to jail for. Like with a lot of my legislation that controls how we help our clients through the employee relations framework, they can get into trouble, but they can't do jail. The only one really is around this WH&S space. Correct. I think understanding what the hazards or the risks are the first step of any business, and that's where a lot of businesses don't spend any time. They see it, as you said in your introduction, as a blue collar thing. There's a hammer gun or a nail gun or a drop saw or whatever that might be. That's a big scary thing that can cut off fingers or whatever that might be. Yes, 100% it can. But from a white collar perspective, if you don't know what your hazards or risks are, how can you manage those? And that's where I think a lot of people don't spend time understanding what their hazards and risks might be in their workplace. So if you think about even something as simple as electrical hazards, you're supposed to have everything by law tested and tagged. No one does that. And then you have an electrocution at your workplace by someone using a faulty lead. That's where the hazard is. That's where the risk is. But if you're not in tune with the space of understanding what that hazard and risk is, you'll never see it.
I think the other big one too for business owners, which they can't see, and it's not like it's an easy conversation to have, is the risk around managing stress in the workplace or the risk around managing mental health in the workplace. You know, and I think, you know, people would be much more comfortable talking to someone about broken arm or even cancer than having a conversation with, you know, along the lines of, Steve, you're looking a bit stressed at the moment, you know, can we help?
It's a horrible thing, and it's certainly one of our primary focus areas is managing stress. We have within our team a professional stress management consultant for that very reason. Interestingly, stress in this country, as way back as 2008, was costing us $14.81 billion per year in the business space in Australia. Presentism, which is a shocking word to say, and absenteeism cost an additional $10.1 billion per year to business. And on average, 3.2 days per worker are lost each year through stress. And it's something I'm very familiar with. I had a workplace accident about 6 years ago, and I was hit in the back of the head and neck with some fairly serious weight. And there was concern around bleed on brain, et cetera, and look, I'm big enough and ugly enough, if I can say that, to freely admit I was basically sedentary for around 6 months. I wasn't allowed to walk, I wasn't allowed to move, I certainly couldn't drive, and I basically sat in an armchair and watched golf on Foxtel and repeats of football games and ate pizzas. And the impact on me was not so much the neck, it got mostly better, but I put on an enormous amount of weight. As a consequence, when I returned to work, I wasn't who I was when I went off in April. I was someone completely different. I struggled to do my job. My clothes didn't fit me. I felt just completely lost. What then happened is my stress increased, and I ended up going and having to seek professional help through something that was not my fault. Now, we can have all the legislative frameworks in place, we can have all the policies in place. That's not going to avoid an accident, but what it's going to do is assist the person through the process of returning to work. Stress is a horrible thing. One of the areas we work very, very noticeably or forcefully in is emergency planning, which is in Section 4, covered in Section 4 of the regulation. And it talks about what you must have as a business. And certainly from a white collar business, this is one area they really need to start thinking about. Emergency plans. What happens in an emergency? Where do we evacuate to? How do we do it? What's the process? Now, the regulation says you must have an emergency plan, but there's a secondary document called AS 3745, Australian Standard 3745, Planning for Emergencies in Facilities. And it's a wide-ranging document. I've got it sitting just above me here that's about this thick, and it goes through a variety of different details. But in Section 6.1.2, it talks about training. And when we're talking about stress, one of the areas that it really amplifies is in point J, human behaviours during emergencies. If you think about stress and that $14.8 billion worth of stress, and think about that in an emergency situation, how are you going to react if you're suddenly the warden thrust into an environment you're completely foreign to, and you're now responsible for getting people safely out of a building? How's your stress going to be? How are your co-workers going to feel when they've had a near miss? All of these sort of things all amplify that level of stress. It's not just the bullying, harassment stress. It's not just a workplace injury stress. It's minute stress. It's what's going to happen if stress. And it's a very interesting area of where work health and safety is going at the moment, and certainly where things like emergency planning need to go to be compliant.
So what are some simple fix-its for our listeners?
I think the first thing you need to look at as a business is identify what your business inherent risks might be. We've talked a lot about emergency planning, stress, et cetera. They might be none of your inherent risks, but they might be all of them. Have a think about what you're going to do. Ask questions, get some advice. There's enormous documents. You know, we go back to alcohol. You should have an alcohol and drug policy. Safe Work have got Safe Work have got documents out there if you're unsure about what that looks like. EAP programs, employee assistance programs. It's a whole range of different things that you need to measure and understand versus the risk. Understand I suppose the framework of hazard identification. understand if you identify a risk or a hazard, how you're going to manage that. Can you eliminate it? Can you substitute it? Can you engineer it? Can you put in administrative protocols? Can you wear steel cap boots, for example? There's a whole range of different things that you need to do, but certainly starting at that beginning, understanding the hazards and risks in your business, getting that area right is vital to any program.
So I imagine, stress is probably one of the biggest issues for many white-collar businesses. How can they manage that challenge or that onslaught?
So there's a variety of documents in place that talk about stress, the relationship between stress and workplaces. It talks about how to manage those processes. But a lot of people aren't skilled in that area. They don't understand stress. I don't understand stress. But what you need to, I suppose, drive is having the policy components, the procedural components in place, that at least you've got something that says, okay, Fred over there is not feeling terribly well.
Yep.
He's looking a bit ragged. His workplace is dropping. We've done the limited assessment we can do as non-professionals. Who do we go to next? But have that documented.
Yeah, have it ready to go. We're
100%.
big fans of EAP, and we do EAP for our clients.
Yep.
And, and it's a great tool for business owners who want to do the right thing by their employees. But, when somebody comes in and they're teary and their life's a mess and they want to help, but they're just not skilled up to do it, business owners. So being able to refer them to someone who can help them, we have it in our business. And sometimes the way we use it in our business, Steve, and I think this is a really good example of stress, sometimes we have to put our employee experts in very stressful situations. They might be managing a very nasty investigation in the workplace, and some of the stuff they wouldn't like to see and hear again. And so it's a great way for them to debrief, so that they can go and talk to a professional, get it all out and manage that. So it's really, really important.
It certainly is, and taking a slight right turn, as you do know, we work in some other areas around, say, customer service training. One of the things we initially do, and it's almost the antithesis of what you're talking about, is we look at stress before we conduct the training. So we do the Myers-Briggs testing, for example, to understand what that person is before we try and train them. It's no different in what we're doing here, in particular around emergency planning. To put it back into a work health and safety framework, understanding what the individual is capable of within their own set of skills before we undertake any training. And it's the same when you're writing policy, understanding the hazards, understanding the risks, understanding your people and what to do next. Document it out, process it.
So what do you love about what you do?
Helping people. In a nutshell, it's I don't make things. I don't make, a guitar or a printer or something like that. But I'd like to think we make business life easier.
Yeah.
What we try and do is say to people, give me your problems.
Yeah. We'll
talk about your problems as we go through, but we're going to fix them for you and at least have something. So if the worst happens, you're covered. We look at it as just an addition of business insurance.
It is.
And by talking constantly to our clients and trying to educate them, even if it's just a little bit, so that, if they decide that they want to move on with their own work now and they can take care of it themselves, they're in the best possible position to be able to do that. I don't really ever want to see another worker or employer go through the nightmare that I had when those objects hit me in the back of the head. That's what drives me every day.
And I think, having that intimate, although sad experience is very compelling. So that's a great way to chat about what do you do for clients? How can you help clients?
What we tend to do is we run a program that says, okay, the first step is to find out what you know, what you've got and where you want to go. And we look at the hazards for the clients. We look at the risks. So, for example, quite recently we started working with a real estate agency. And their inherent risk was around remote and isolated workers. So that's where we started.
Which they wouldn't have even thought of.
They'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
Never heard of the section in the regulation. So we look at the hazard as an overall picture of the business. What do you do? We become almost immersed in that business to understand it from the ground up and all of the players within it. That's how we develop what happens next. And we try and run it across what we call a 13-month program. Month 1 being the audit stage, what, how, who. And then we narrow down and present a calendar to the client, and we start at the beginning and work at the end. And across that journey, we document everything. We build the evidence folders, we build the document folders, and we try and teach. So we'll go in once a month to our clients, and we'll conduct their toolbox talk for them. And basically, we get everyone on site involved, from the managers down to the floor sweeper, if you like, so that everyone feels included. Everyone's got a role in it, and we try to do it as lightheartedly as we can, and as enjoyably as we can, and as accurately but briefly as we can. So at least then the managers are starting to hear the language and hear how to present, and the workers suddenly feel a little bit more trust in the team. And we have what they call consultation, which is one of the core underpinnings of the legislation. That's how we help our clients. We look at it as I suppose an education process as much as a compliance process. And at the end of that 12 or 13 months, if we all part as friends and they say we're ready to keep going on our own, fantastic, my work here is done. There's nothing better than saying, there you go, there's your system, good luck, Natasha.
Yeah.
Because your work's done. You've done a good job. I'm certainly not scared to let clients go after 12 months.
Well, it means that's a secret of your success. Tell me, how could people get in touch with you, Steve?
Number of different ways. Certainly through our website, which is www.salesprosmart.com.
Great.
Or alternatively, just put a Steve in front of it and you can email me. And that's probably the two best ways to go. Emails come to my phone. I'm always contactable. And we'd be delighted to talk to anyone, even in a no cost and no obligation manner, to at least give them some guidance on where to go next. Work health and safety is a passion, as I'm sure HR is for you.
Yes.
And if I can change one person's perception of what the law says and what their requirements are, even if they do it themselves, I'm the happiest man in the world, because they're doing something positive about their work health and safety. They're not just letting it drip.
On that note, thank you so much for coming and chatting to us today. I've learned a lot, and I am sure many of our listeners have. We are thrilled to have had you on our session this afternoon. If anyone does want to reach out, please do so. Steve's a great guy, and you'll get lots of good feedback and good stuff from him. Thank you very much for taking your time with us today.
Again, thanks so much for the opportunity, Natasha.
Bye.
Take care.